All right, everybody, let's continue on with our lecture on valuation, Unit 17, page 476. This would be a good testing area, just understanding some basic economic principles of value. We already learned what highest and best use means. What does that mean? Highest and best use.
Best return on your property.
The best return, the highest and best, the most profitable use of the property. I usually think about zoning. Do you all think about zoning when you think about highest and best use? You and I, as owner of property, don't determine the highest and best use. Even appraisers, they do have to look at it and see. That's one of their first steps. What's the highest and best use? Because couldn't a neighborhood be trending toward commercial? And an appraiser may look at that and say, yes, I'm looking at a residential house, but it would be better suited, the value's more geared toward commercial because the neighborhood's going that way. So highest and best use, the most profitable use. Take a moment, if you will, and read over your paragraph called substitution. And does that theory make sense? It does make sense. It's comparison shopping, isn't it? This would be the main principle that an appraiser would use using the sales comparison approach. What are people choosing over another? You know, what are the comparable houses selling for? And it does make sense. It's a little bit like what I mentioned to you earlier. A real estate agent may show a house that's a little more expensive and show the other one that's less, kind of knowing that the buyer's probably going to pick the lesser one, but it's giving them a chance to compare. Supply and demand affects value. We've talked about that a lot throughout the course, and so you guys understand that, I'm sure. Let's look at conformity for a minute. Take a minute and read over your conformity paragraph. Have you ever heard the statement, don't buy the biggest house in the neighborhood? I've heard that statement, haven't you? If you overbuild for the neighborhood, we could argue the prices that are less might come up a little, but your property's going to come down, isn't it, in value? It would be hard to maintain that value if it's overbuilt. I was driving around some area not too long ago, and the houses were all pretty small, and then I saw a house that looked new. The neighborhood was older and the houses were small, and then I saw this house that was newly built and big, and that's what went through my mind. I'm thinking, that's out of line in this neighborhood. Now, you could argue, but that's what I want, and this is my lot, and this is what I'm going to do. And then you would have to say, well, what kind of enjoyment level are you getting out of it, and for how long are you going to be living there? Because conforming neighborhoods maintain value. It's the ones that are out of line that are going to be the ones that hurt. Look at anticipation. The appraiser is going to use anticipation and to predict. In other words, what is something that's coming up, like roads coming through or an airport being expanded? But I think it's really interesting. Look at what the last sentence says. It says, In other words, the current value being affected by future possibilities, whether fact or rumor. I think that's interesting, don't you? What do you think that means? Fact or rumor? In other words, rumors could harm, like what kind of rumor?
I guess a warehouse gonna be across the street, or the highway is coming.
Yeah, golf course could
Huh?
Golf course or something like
Yeah, I have a situation now, right inside my townhome, area. They're gonna build 440 new homes, and no more traffic lights, no more stop signs or anything, but everybody's just upset and livid.
But that's a fact.
But it's now, has gone to the, commission, or the High Point City, and yeah, it's a fact, it's coming,
Yeah.
so.
So anticipating, an appraiser looking at where you live is gonna anticipate how that's gonna affect your value, aren't
Yes.
they? And I can't think of anything that's rumor, although maybe this will work. I can remember, you all know the Cardinal area. The Cardinal area, I remember, because I've been in the business so long, I remember when a developer bought that land, because he invited all the real estate brokers out and had a pig picking. It was just raw land, farmland like, and his envision about how he's gonna develop it. And so the Cardinal went real strong. Back in those days, driving out to the Cardinal was out in the boonies. It was kind of like, I gotta go out to the Cardinal show today. I'll see y'all later. You know, it was like, it was way out in the boonies. But anyway, the Cardinal got a whole lot of anticipation, a whole lot of, the prices were good, people were buying. And then the Cardinal kind of slowed down and leveled off. And it was because of this one thing, and maybe some others, the airport. There was rumor out that the airport is going to expand, and that negated everybody, the value of the property, because people were thinking noise, is it in the noise code? And they were thinking about traffic maybe, what's gonna happen here. And I don't know what officially ended up happening. I know the FedEx came out there, right? And that came, but the values went down in the Cardinal. Now, think about it for a minute. It reminds me, and I don't know that if this is 100% what happened, but it reminds me of the story of the little girl or little boy who cried wolf. Woof, woof, woof. And then you say it so much and it doesn't happen, but it does make a negative, doesn't it? What was happening back then in that neighborhood, the owners sort of caused a lot of their own problem in a way. It was in the newspaper almost every day, every weekend. The owners are upset that their property values are going down because the airport's expanding. So if you're reading about the Cardinal, you're saying, oh, the values are going down because the airport's expanding. And so it's almost like they shot themselves in the foot, you know? Huh?
They were telling on themselves.
And it kind of gave a negative connotation or negative image. So the values did go down, and then Cardinal came back strong. It's one of those neighborhoods that's just been a little odd over the years. Now people love it out there. You know, there's a golf course and tennis. The roads have expanded out there, and it's easy access. But it can happen. What's going around the area can affect your property. Let me give you an example of how you could use this as a real estate agent, not an appraiser. What if you get a call from an owner who says, I want you to come meet me, I want to talk to you about putting my house on the market. And you drive out there, get out of your car and walk up the driveway, and all you hear is bark, 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 bark. And you look over to the right and there are 3 pit bull dogs climbing up on the fence, slobbering, barking, just barking and scaring you to death, and the grass is knee-high, not kept up. You can anticipate it's going to affect the marketability of this house. What do y'all think? It will. Guys, it will. Now, there might not be anything you can do about it, but you can anticipate, predict, owner, that's going to be a little bit of a nuisance. Is there anything we can do about it? And I don't know that there is. I would say to the owner, do you know those people? Is there anything we can do when we show the property? Because they're probably getting upset because they see new people. You know, we're not trying to hide anything, that's not what I'm saying. But new people coming in, the dogs are gonna bark, and they might not do that once somebody lives there. But you can anticipate that would be bad for that property that you're trying to market. Look at contribution. The principle that if any component may add value to the property, or will it add value to the property? And they even bring up over improvement here also. Like what? Can you think of any examples in that regard?
Air conditioning.
Huh?
Yes, air conditioning.
What do you mean?
Contribution?
Yeah.
Air conditioning and remodeling an older office building.
Yeah, and that might not add value to the property because why? The example there says this old building, they're putting in new air conditioning, but it might not add value to the property. Why?
You expect air conditioning.
Because you expect it. You expect it. So in other words, if you don't have certain amenities, it could affect your value. If you're in a certain price point, I don't know what price point it would be, 300,000, maybe a little less than that. If you don't have granite countertops, your value will be affected like that, don't you think? Because buyers are going to expect a certain level of amenities in a certain price point. I had a call, and did I tell you all this? I can't remember. I had a call one day when I was in real estate many years ago from this person that I sold them a house. They called me up and says, Jan, we're thinking about adding a pool. What do you think? And I kind of bit my lip a minute because I'm thinking, that's a loaded question is what I'm thinking. And so I thought about it a minute, and here's the way I answered it. I think it's a pretty good answer. I said, how long do you plan on living there? Because you live there, and how much value will you get out of it? How much entertainment, enjoyment value will you get? Bottom line, other buyers are not going to pay for it though, are they? If you add a pool, now I'm just generalizing, in this area, unless you've got a real upscale property, most people see pools as negative because of the liability of it, the cost of it, and that sort of thing. And sometimes people buy houses with pools and have them filled in. You know, liability is the biggest thing, I think. You know, somebody drowning. But, so that's the way I answered it. What enjoyment level are you going to get? Because if you spend $30,000, your house doesn't go up in value $30,000 on something like that. In fact, buyers might say, I'm going to offer even less because now I got to deal with it. Think about this other thing. I remember an agent looking to put a house on the market in this neighborhood, and the prices had kind of peaked. The prices had peaked around $260,000. And the agent said, this property really needs to be more than that though. They've really kept the house up. They've got a beautifully landscaped yard. They put in over $30,000 in landscaping. Now, landscaping's expensive and $30,000 is a lot of money, but they did major landscaping. And she says, I'm going to see if we can list it for over that price point. We need to break that ceiling. The houses need to be, they shouldn't just stall. Well, people started looking at that property, and here's some of the things she heard. I don't know how to take care of all that landscaping. It went backwards. You know, the seller put it in, and it looks beautiful, but I don't know anything about it. How to maintain it, how to take care of it, the cost of it. So sometimes these amenities that we think will be an improvement could backfire a little bit. But guys, I don't know that I would tell somebody not to do something, but I would say to them, how much are you going to get out of it? It's kind of like, have you heard people say, used to be real estate agents would say this, if you're moving, paint your walls neutral. We used to call it relocation beige. Beige carpeting, beige walls, because you kind of want a palette where buyers can't object too much, you know, where everything's neutral. Well, now, I've heard that all my life and being in real estate. My den's red. My living room is yellow. My bedroom's green. And I like those colors. Now, I do know that probably if we sell, that's going to be a little bit of a negative because people are going to say, I got to repaint it and it's going to cost thousands. And so most people probably would paint their homes maybe more neutral colors. But I'm living there now, right? And so you do have to think about what kind of enjoyment you're going to get out instead of just living just for resale because you don't know how long you're going to live there, I guess. Alrighty, competition. What do you think about the last sentence in competition? Excess profit tends to attract ruinous competition. What does that mean? Excess profit tends to attract ruinous competition. That word ruinous is funny, isn't it? Let's put it in real estate terms. If you put a house on the market and there's nothing else on the market, I can almost guarantee you there will be soon. Somebody broke the ice and put their house on the market. Somebody else is going to put their house on the market. Just waiting. It reminds me of who's on the dance floor first. Nobody's dancing, and we're standing around. We all want to, but then somebody goes out there, then everybody goes. So when you have competition, you're going to have less profit. Think about all the fast food restaurants or all the drugstores on every corner. They're competing with each other, and so only so many more people will come to go to drugstores. So you're sharing consumers, aren't you? So the profits won't be what they were. You're basically sharing profits. Maybe there'll be a bigger amount of profits, but it's going to be shared. Change in real estate is inevitable, isn't it? Neighborhoods go through cycles. Neighborhoods that are new but get a little bit of age on them, then they may go into disrepair. Maybe some people say, well, I want to redo, and the community comes back as revitalized, and then it becomes popular again. So neighborhoods go through cycles like that, so change is inevitable. Let's talk about the appraisal process. This is level 1. So as an appraiser, think about this as taking on they've gotten this job, they've gotten this assignment, they've gotten this report that they have to complete. So think about it that way. If you've got a report to complete, don't you think you need to kind of figure out what kind of data you need? And the appraiser's looking at, here, I need to get my specifics about that property, but I also need to get overall general information too. Because the appraiser doesn't just come in and look at the inside walls, they're looking around at the whole area. They're looking at what could be influencing the value in this neighborhood. Like, is this neighborhood near a landfill site? Didn't you guys learn that if you're located near a landfill site, it could affect the value, what was it per mile, $6,000 or your house would go down in value. Seems like it was like 6,000 or 4,000 every mile, how close you are to the.
I think it was 6,000 a mile.
6,000 is sort of what I was thinking. So they're going to look at the information they need, and here are the appraisal steps. 1, they're going to define the assignment, the problem. There are different types of appraisals, everybody. I mean, think about it just simply. Couldn't an appraiser be assigned a big commercial assignment, appraisal on a big commercial project? Or it could be a residential house. That would be handled differently. So what is my assignment? What is the problem? And it'll tell me how I'm going to approach it. They're going to decide what type of data is needed, depending on the job they have to do. They're going to collect the data, analyze the data, verify the data. I can tell you when you get your real estate license, let's say that you get a listing and your listing sells pretty quickly. And get a phone call after it goes under contract, It could be from an appraiser appraising another house in that area, and they might ask you, why do you think your house sold so quickly? What kind of condition was it in? They're verifying information about that area so they can better appraise the property that they're looking at. So appraisers oftentimes will call you and ask you those questions. The appraiser number 4 is going to determine the highest and best use. What are we looking at currently? What do we think its potential is? Number 5, I want you to look at number 5. The appraiser is going to estimate the land value as if it is separated from the improvements. What is the value of this site? Even if there's a house on it, the site has value without the improvement. And so they're going to look at it that way. I want you to highlight your last sentence there. It's important, and after we talk about it more on Wednesday, we'll do the majority of our math Wednesday night, everybody. And by the way, we're going to touch base a little tiny bit on Unit 13, because what we're talking about in Unit 17, the income approach, we'll also talk about that in Unit 13, because we're going to be talking about leveraging. And we're going to be talking about cash flow in Unit 13. And so then the appraiser is going to estimate the value by using all 3 approaches. The 3 approaches are the sales comparison approach. And if you want to look on page 479, you can see on your last 3 or 4 bullets, the sales comparison approach, the cost approach, and the income approach. Those are the 3 approaches that an appraiser is probably going to do, I would say, on most appraisal assignments. So if the appraiser is doing all 3 approaches, think about it this way. They're looking at this property through this lens, the sales comparison approach. They're looking at the property through this lens, the cost approach, and they're looking at it through the lens of the income approach. The numbers will come out differently because the approaches are different, but then the appraiser is going to look at those 3 approaches and come to their final conclusion, and that's called reconcile. We're going to reconcile those the final step is reconciliation. We're going to look at the 3 approaches and see which one is the best indicator on the value based on the property that we're looking at. So in other words, in your reading it said, if the property is residential or if the property is land, the appraiser is going to reconcile toward the sales comparison approach. The sales comparison approach is a predictor of residential value of land. If the property is of a unique nature, or if it's a property that there's not comps like office buildings, schools, churches, things like that, the appraiser will veer in, reconcile toward the cost approach. If the property is an income producing property, like apartment building or just income producing, theater, commercial building that's income producing, the appraiser is going to use the numbers that show up on the income approach. And so doing the different approaches just lets you kind of do a check and balance and compare each approach on the subject, and then the appraiser will zero in on the one that he or she thinks is the best predictor of value. Go with me over to the page 480, I beg your pardon. 480, 481, and 482 is a sample of the residential appraisal report. And you're not going to be tested on this, but it would be probably worth your while just to kind of read over it a little bit. But just for a summary, page 480, the first page of the appraisal is just information about the subject property. All the information, there's a lot of detailed information here. There's room sizes and the amenities, and there's some other narrative on this page. On page 481, The majority of this page is the sales comparison approach because this is a residential appraisal. And so if it's residential, the sales comparison approach is a perfect fit for coming up with value. If you turn over to page 482, the middle of page 482, you see the cost approach. So the assignment told this appraiser, the assignment was do the sales approach and do the cost approach. You don't need to do the income approach on this assignment because if you look at the sales approach, look right under it toward the bottom of the page, you see income approach, but there are no numbers in there because the person that gave this job to the appraiser didn't ask for them to do the income approach. They just said do the sales and the cost approach. So that's probably pretty common too. And after the appraiser does the approaches that he was ordered to do, then the appraiser will come to the conclusion, and that's called reconcile. Let's look on page 483. So the three approaches, sales, cost, and income. Let me give you some different names for these approaches. I know it's in your reading, but why don't we just go ahead and put it in our notes here at the top of page 483. The sales comparison approach also could be called the market data approach. Market data, because you're looking at the marketplace and you're getting the data out of there. What are buyers paying for 3 bedrooms, 2 baths? What are buyers paying for a house with a garage? It's called market data. Sales comparison approach. The next approach is called the cost approach. It could be called the replacement cost approach, or it could be called the reproduction cost approach. The replacement approach is, if you'll understand this, a house is, well, not a house is a house. A roof is a roof. Carpet's carpet. Air conditioning is air conditioning. Certain things are expected and it's just that item is just going to be replaced. Versus reproduction. A reproduction cost approach, the appraiser is putting back an exact duplicate of the property he's looking at. So for example, if your job was to appraise the Biltmore house, guys, a roof is not a roof up there at the Biltmore house. It's going to have to look like that. And so you're going to try to duplicate that historic property. And so does it make sense that that approach would be probably more expensive? The property would come out at a higher value than the replacement approach. Another way to think about the replacement cost approach, if you were calling an insurance company to get homeowners insurance quote, they kind of do a little quick replacement. How many square feet do you have? Do you have a fireplace or air conditioning? They kind of do a little replacement. In other words, they're just looking at replacing your house, right? They're not looking at, well, how much did you pay for the carpet? What kind of brick is that? They're not looking, brick's brick, carpet's carpet. Does that make sense? For example, if you had an appraiser come into your house, and just generalizing here, if the appraiser comes in, and I like some nice things. Do y'all? I've always liked nice carpet. So whenever I've bought carpet, I've bought the higher end of carpet. Well, an appraiser comes in, carpet's carpet. But I paid $100 something. Carpet's carpet, yeah. He's placated me, maybe. I got it. But carpet's carpet. Because how many buyers are going to be willing to pay that extra when they expect carpet to be there anyway? Or you put on the most expensive roof. Well, depends on what approach the appraiser's looking at. A house needs a roof, doesn't it? And so that's what I mean when I say a roof is a roof. Carpet's carpet, brick's brick. And then the income approach could be called the income capitalization approach, could be called just the income approach, could be called the direct capitalization approach. I'm at the top of 483. And in your reading, they gave you something else called the gross rent multiplier. Did you guys look at that? It's really a pretty cool formula. I'll show you that on Wednesday night. But so the income approach can be formal, and that would be called the income capitalization approach, or it could be informal. And I'll show you that the gross rent multiplier is a real informal version. Let's look at the sales comparison approach first. Level 3. Level 3, why do you think this sales comparison approach is level 3 study?
Because it's what we're gonna be doing.
Because it's what you're going to be doing. Guys, this is real life. The benefit of learning this is something that you're going to utilize in your real life real estate career. And so level 3 does seem to be what Demarius is saying, is something that we're going to be using kind of like your agency, kind of like your contract units. Those were more intense, level 3, because it's really knowledge you need to have for going on into the real estate business. So the sales comparison approach is most often used, I mentioned to you, single family houses, property, and land. There are 4 steps, so let's just look at them. The first step is, when did the property sell? Now, when we're talking about the property, we're talking about the comparable. So the sales, we've got the subject property that the appraiser is looking at, and then he's looking at comps. So he might have he's going to have at least 3. So when we say the date of the sale, how recent did the comparable sell? In other words, the more recent the sale, the better. So what the appraiser is doing is looking at comparables that look as similar to the subject as possible. In other words, if the subject is 2,100 square feet, he's going to be searching for houses that are similar to that. It could be 2,000, it could be 1,950, it could be 2,150. Those are pretty similar, aren't they? So they're looking for similar property to this. Could be 4 bedrooms. This could be 4, 3, but they're all similar, aren't they? So they're looking for comparables, but the big thing we're talking about now is the date. If this comp sold last year, depending on when it was last year, it might be too old. If this one sold 2 months ago, that's probably a good comp. Starting out, it's good. If this one sold 6 months ago, it's probably a good one to use. If this one was over a year or about a year ago, I'm not saying don't use it, but it might not be the best comp, because that's a long time ago. In the market we're in now, 6 months might be a long time ago. You know, you really need to know what the market is where you're doing your real estate. When the market is a buyer's market, houses tended to stay on the market longer. So you would have to look at what is the market doing. And if houses stayed on the market longer and didn't sell as quickly as they are, that would be the marketplace that you're looking at. Right now, the marketplace is certain price points are selling quick. And so if you're looking for comparables in that certain price point, you're going to look for the most recent sale. You're going to look for the most recent sale anyway, as a real estate agent doing a CMA or as an appraiser doing the sales approach. Guys, the sales comparison approach is more formal. It's what an appraiser uses. You and I are going to do what we call a CMA. A CMA looks like the sales comparison approach, to be honest with you. We're going to do some of the same things that an appraiser will do, except we're not looking for value, and we're not going to be as detailed as an appraiser. Location would be the second step. So it says you want to get a location as similar to the location of the subject. Now, yes, it would be nice to stay in the same neighborhood, but there's not a rule saying you have to stay in the same neighborhood. Have you ever been to a neighborhood that reminds you of another neighborhood in your same city? There are neighborhoods that are similar. Now, there may be some differences, could be slight differences, but neighborhoods can be similar. But starting out, you're gonna be searching for a particular area. And you might have to spread out if you don't find what you're looking for. Or maybe you approach it the way where you're starting big and zeroing in. Or starting little and then going out. So you're gonna be looking in the similar area. In other words, if you're looking in Northwest, the property, the subject is in Northwest, you're not gonna go look at sales in the Southeast. Make sense? Did I tell you all this story? I got a call to come look at a seller's house, and her house was in Southeast Greensboro. And I went out to look at the property, and I did my workup, and I went back to do the presentation and gave her the range of numbers. And here's what she literally said to me, I remember it. If my house was in Northwest, it'd be worth more. And but it's not in Northwest. Guys, location is major. Location, location, location. Now that's a bummer you got the same square footage, you got the amenities that a house would have in Northwest or Northeast, but you can't compare Southeast to Northwest or Southeast to Northeast. You just can't do it. Physical features would be like square footage and bedrooms or garage. You're looking for the physical amenities. And then the terms and condition of the sale. What does arm's length mean? An arm's length sale.
Like a parent to a child or something like that.
Say it
More
again.
personal, it's like a parent to a child.
Is arm's length?
It's not,
Is not arm's length.
It's not arm's length.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Something goes really, really high, really low or something.
yeah, if you're searching, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine, go ahead.
If you're searching, she's saying something that I like to say. If you're searching in a neighborhood for comps and does it make sense that most neighborhoods will kind of tell you their story? You'll see what a neighborhood's value is. It might be like 150 to 165 or 70. You'll kind of get an idea of a range of value when you start searching around. And if you see a house that's sold for unusually high or a property that's sold for unusually low, it might be an outlier. It might not be what the neighborhood is telling you that it is. And that could be because it wasn't arm's length, or it could be something unusual. That house that sold really high could be just decked out to the nines, and somebody was willing to pay for it. I'm not saying not to look at them, but I'm saying you might not use them, right? Excuse me. If you see one that's sold real high, higher than what you think the neighborhood is, I would know all about that one, because don't you think the owner's going to know about that one? If you don't have the information on it, they're going to say, well, I know a house sold a street over, and it sold for more than you're telling me my house is worth, and my house is just as good as it. Don't you think it'd be good to have all the information you can? Not just the 3 comps you're looking at. Alrighty, go with me, if you will, to the top of page 484. Take a minute, when I get my breath here, take a minute, and it will take you just a couple of minutes. If you'll read your 3rd paragraph, this is kind of the basis of the sales approach, and then I'll paraphrase it for you. So page 484, 3rd paragraph. Now, what we're looking for is comps, and this paragraph is explaining to you how to make the adjustments. So, let me give you a little shortcut and see if this helps. My quick way of looking at this is these initials, CBS and CIA. And here's what it means. If the comparable is better, subtract the difference from the comparable. If the comparable is better, subtract the difference from the comp. If the comparable is inferior to the subject, add the difference. So let me give you an example. Comparable, we're trying to predict the value of the subject. We know this comp sold for $200,000. It sold and it closed out. It had 2,000 square feet. The subject has 2,100 square feet. Now think about that for a minute, just looking at that amenity. Does it make sense to you that probably someone would pay more for more square footage? Does that make sense? The subject should get more money because it's got more square footage than the comp. So the comparable is inferior square footage wise. So we're going to add some money for square footage on that one amenity. So let's just make up a number. Let's say the square footage difference is $50 per square foot. What that means is that's not what it would cost to build that house, $50 a square foot. That number is what a buyer would be willing to pay for the extra square foot. They would be willing to pay $50 per square foot for the extra. So the difference in the square footage is 100 square feet, isn't it? So you would say 100 square feet times $50 a square foot, and that's $5,000. So now with just that one adjustment, it looks like the subject should bring in $205,000 just on that one adjustment. Now that's not all we're going to do, but just with one change. Let's look at the bedrooms. The comparable is inferior again, and we want to make it like the subject. So think about the subject is here. It's got 4 bedrooms, and the comparable is here. Don't we want to make it look like the subject? We're trying to predict this. So we know that that sold for $200 with 3 bedrooms. What would it sell for if it had 4 bedrooms? We're manipulating that comparable to predict what we think the subject will do. So let me just give you a number. Let's just pretend that a bedroom is worth $3,000. So now we know that somebody would probably pay more for the subject to get another bedroom. Does that make sense? Let's look at the bathrooms. The comparable has 2.5 and the subject's here. So the comparable is better in bathrooms than the subject. We need to take away the value of the difference. And the difference is a half bath, isn't it? Comparable has a half bath more than this. So let me just put a number, 1,000, and I'm making them up. So we're going to minus $1,000 because a buyer wouldn't pay for 2.5 baths on the subject when it only has 2 baths. Let's look at the garage. The comparable has a garage, so isn't it better than the subject that does not have a garage?
Are you stating like the bathrooms are 2,000 each?
Yeah. So
Even though it's only a half?
Yeah, I probably am.
Okay.
Just making sure.
Yeah.
I know that we will have those actual numbers and have to do it.
No. Yeah, you've got 2 math questions of CMAs where they give you the numbers. So they'll say the square footage difference is $70 a square foot. Use that. Or the bathrooms, or the bathroom is 2,000. If it's a half bath, you just divide it in half. And you've got one math problem where they don't give you the number, and you got to figure it out. And I'm going to show you that in a minute. And then we'll do more math on Wednesday night. So the comparable is better, so we know we're going to subtract whatever the garages were, so let's just throw out 4,000. Now, 200, I know that my numbers aren't good, it's not a good example, but the comparable, we got 208, minus 1 is 207, minus 4 is 203, isn't it? So if this comparable looked like this when it's sold, it would have sold for 203. And so that predicts what the subject will do. Just a real off-the-cuff example. Those initials will help you. Comp better, subtract. Comp inferior, bring it up. Because you're really trying to make the comp equal to the subject. So just think about the subject is the baseline. If the comp is below, bring it up. If the comp is above, bring it down. So, for example, look with me on page 485. Comp A sold for 118. Guys, on 485, this chart, to me, this looks like a CMA. This would be what I would work up, prepared to go visit with a seller. I'm going to find some comparables and I'm going to show some pluses and minuses and to help the seller figure out what their house is worth, because they are going to be the ones that do that. So Comp A sold for 118. So there are no adjustments, same, until we get down to the exterior condition. The comparable one's exterior is better than the subject's average. So if it's better, why are we subtracting? If it's better, it seems like we would be adding. So why are we subtracting? Huh?
You want it to look the same as the subject?
You want it to look the same as the subject? So you want it to be average. If you don't want it to be better, you want it to be average. So you're bringing it down. Look at comparable B. The prices show you a little bit, but it's not the end all. It's sold for 112 for a reason. And so if you look at the location, the appraiser said the location on Comp B is poorer than the subject. How could the location be poorer, worse than the location on the subject? What would make a location worse?
Flood zone, landfill.
High traffic area.
High traffic area, flood zone, near landfill. It could be anything. Even if it's the same general location, it could be just, guys, have you ever heard, I've always heard, buy a corner lot, you get extra land, but you also get extra traffic, don't you? You get traffic there, you get traffic there. And so it could be on a high traffic, the main road. Go down to where you see poorer again. Poorer on the exterior. The exterior is poorer than the subject. The exterior is not even average. Let's at least bring it up to average. So we're adding to make these amenities at least average. Look with me over at Comp C. Well, it looks like it's sold for more than what the neighborhood's typically is doing. Sold for more, maybe for a reason. The lot size is larger. So the appraiser is going to have to make adjustments on that. It needs to be closer to the size of the subject. And then if you go down to the condition exterior and interior, it's better. It's sold for more, it's better. So we need to make it look average like the subject. So we're minusing it to bring it down to the subject. Are you guys sort of getting the drift of it? Well then, if you are, go with me, if you will, to page 499. And I'd like you to look at number 15. Number 15. And the answer is C. You deduct from the comparable. So you could eliminate A and B, couldn't you? Because we never do anything to the subject. So we're either adding to or deducting from the comparable, and we're deducting because, why? Because it's got another bedroom. Subject has 2 bedrooms, the comparable has 3. We need to bring it down to 2. Alrighty, go with me to the next page, and I'd like you to look at number 24. And so, what do you think? D, neither. Why neither?
Because the first one was 18 months ago.
Good. It's a 2-story, but golly, it's been 18 months ago. Guys, rule of thumb, going back maybe 12 months, but it's all going to depend on the marketplace. But going back a year is a long time, isn't it? Isn't it a long time? Now, an appraiser has the knowledge, the expertise, and the software. They can do some more thorough analysis like time adjustment, but you and I, if we're doing a CMA, you know, you want to find the most recent. The more recent is the better predictor. So why not 1-story home?
Is it a different neighborhood too?
Well, it's,
No family
Yeah, it's a
background.
1-story, you know?
It was very different.
yeah, but the biggest difference is a 1-story is not comparable to a 2-story ever. That's the biggest kicker. The different neighborhood, that might not be the only kick out, because the neighborhood could be similar. You know, the neighborhood could be similar, but you can make the adjustments for the bathrooms, and you can even make adjustments for a garage, but the 1-story, you cannot, it's just not comparable. 1-stories cost more to build, basically, in the whole scheme of things. 2-stories, you're just building up on 1 plot, 1 footing, building up, 1 roof. 1 level, you're going out this way. So it means more land, more footing, more roofing. So 1 levels would be more expensive with all things considered. Alrighty, I want you to look at number 34. See if you can do 34. Now let me show you how I would set it up. I don't know that there would be a way to do this. Maybe you can just look at it, I don't know. But when I do my approaches, I always write them down, because you need to get the sales prices of the comps. That's 73, 74.
62,
What's the last one?
71.
71. Alrighty, so read what it's saying about the amenities and the adjustments and see if you can figure that problem out. The problem's asking for a range. What does respectively mean
In that order.
in that order? Read it as it's given to you, in that order. I like the way you said that. How y'all doing on that? Does CBS and CIA sound okay? What's the answer?
C.
C. All righty, so let's look at, I think I know why you picked A, Kim, but let's look at it. When it says comp A, B, and D have positive features, it means positive compared to the subject. So it means the subject is inferior, doesn't it? So that means minus, minus, minus. And so the features were 3, 2, and 5, weren't they? And then it said comp C had a feature, was it negative 35? So did it mess you up on whether to add or subtract?
Yeah, I added those and I subtracted the 35.
Uh-huh. So you did the opposite. If it says that they have a positive feature, it means you subtract. If it says they have a negative feature, it means that you add. So you do the opposite of what you think you do.
Oh, okay.
So they had the answer there if you did it that other way? Was it A?
Yes, it was the other way.
That's sneaky. All righty, let's go. We've just got a few more things and then we're going to wrap it up, everybody. Go with me to the bottom of page 485. And it's bringing up this CMA, comparable market analysis, informal version of the sales comparison approach. It's the compromise that the Real Estate Commission and the Appraisal Board had many moons ago. And so real estate agents need a way to assist the seller in pricing their property. And so we can do an informal version of the sales comparison approach. I want you to look at the last 4 lines of that last paragraph. Page 485. Excuse me. The Real Estate Commission will hold brokers accountable for not performing a CMA in a competent manner, and it can take appropriate disciplinary action against the broker. So, a CMA is informal, whereas the sales approach is more formalized, but it's a client level service. In other words, what the commission is saying, this is an expected duty under a client level service. Look at your third paragraph on the next page. The CMA is a client level service, and it's expected that you do a CMA. This came up, didn't it? Was it in Unit 7 or Unit 8? Didn't it come up talking about a CMA? And didn't it even say if you list a property, you might want to update your CMA about every 30 days, depending on what the market's doing? You need to keep your client well informed. So if you had a buyer client, this would be expected also, to help your buyer decide on what's the best price to pay for the property. And they are bringing up working with a customer. If you have a buyer customer, well then they're not a client, are they? So you can't do a CMA for them, but you can give them the facts. So what you could do for a buyer customer is you could run a list and say, here are the houses that have sold in this neighborhood, here are the facts, and you can run a list of here's what's on the market. You cannot manipulate and maneuver around those numbers, because then that's giving them advice, that's helping them figure out a CMA. Any comments on that? Let's look just for a few minutes at the cost approach. We talked just a tiny bit in the day class. I'd like for us to finish where we finished there, so we can pick up on page 487 Wednesday night. The cost approach is another form of appraising that an appraiser will do. It's just a different approach. Cost approach is good for properties that have no comparables. It's good for properties like churches and schools. There wouldn't be comparables. It would be good for properties that are historic properties, again, that wouldn't have comparables. Let's look at the steps. First step on the cost approach, and now this one's level 2. You do have a math problem on it, which would make that part level 3, but let's look at the steps. The first step is the appraiser's going to estimate the land as if the property is vacant. So they're going to estimate the value of the land as if it's just the site. And they remind you, land cannot be depreciated. Now, if you read this unit, it says that about 3 times for sure, maybe even 4 times. Land does not depreciate. Guys, depreciate, my definition, I think, and this might help you see it, depreciate means gets used up. If property is getting used up, it's not worth 100% anymore. It's depreciating. It's getting used up. Land doesn't get used up. It's still there. We learned that in class 1. It's there down to the core of the earth, somewhere, some way. But doesn't mean land can't go down in value. It just doesn't get used up. Second step, it says separate that land from the improvements, and then estimate the cost of building the house back. So in other words, the appraiser is building the house back, if you will, on paper. How big is the house? What does it cost per square footage? He's just building back that house as if it's new. And he's got the land value separate. Third step, the appraiser's going to estimate depreciation, because this house that they just built back new on paper is not a new house. It's a used house. So used houses are going to depreciate. Even if they're kept up, the fact that it's got age on it, it will have some depreciation. If it's been well maintained, maybe not as much depreciation, but it will. If it's not new, it's used, isn't it? So the cost approach does use depreciation, everybody. So number 3 says estimate the amount of accrued depreciation. What does accrued depreciation mean? Over time, accumulating, adding up. Over time, how much has it totally depreciated? Number 4, you subtract that depreciation from the cost new. So once you figured out how much it depreciated, you subtract it from the cost new, and then that leaves you the depreciated value of the structure. And then the last step is add the land back in. So let's look at the chart on page 487. First step, the appraiser got the land value calculated, $27,000. The appraiser also said, well, there's some landscaping and some improvements that we're not going to build back and depreciate on. You know, there's some sort of landscaping, bushes and trees or flowers. The appraiser says it's just worth $8,000. We're not going to put it in the new category and depreciate it. We're really putting it with the site. Next step is, how much would it cost to build back this house? And so the appraiser is using the per square foot method, which is the most common. And so if the house is 1,500 square feet, to build it back at $65 a square foot, we've got a cost new. Well, the house is not new. So the appraiser is going to depreciate this property one way or the other. The way that's shown on this illustration is called the breakdown method. So he's separating out the depreciation under physical, functional, and external. Physical depreciation is like wear and tear, or doesn't have some maintenance that hasn't been taken care of, or is there a physical structural problem? Functional depreciation they call obsolescence because it means it's obsolete. It's something that's not desirable anymore, like a one-bath house. Everybody, even if a house has 2 bedrooms or a townhouse or a condo, it's desirable to have more than one bath. It's desirable to have at least a bath and a half. And so if you've got one bathroom in the property, the appraiser's going to depreciate that because it's not what people want today. Functionality means it's not desirable anymore. And so think about some other things like counters that are not granite. Think about in a bathroom where the faucets haven't been changed out and they're that gold plated. That will be depreciated because it's not the desire now. Things change over time. Now, can't that be fixed? Can't you change out the faucets? And so if it's something that can be fixed, the appraiser says it's curable. It's just not cured right now. Right now you got the gold-plated fixtures, but it could be cured, so the depreciated amount is not as great as the section that says there's not much you can do about it. Like only having one bathroom, there might not be a way to add a half bath. And so that could be in the incurable section. And let me rephrase that for a minute. Adding the half bath, it might not be easily done, or the cost of doing it is higher than what would make sense economically for the price point of the home. And so incurable doesn't necessarily mean it can't be done, but what it means is the cost to do it might not make sense. For example, look at this under the physical depreciation. Are you with me in the chart? Do you see incurable structural deterioration? Do you see that? And it's $97.50. Now, there's a structural problem here. It may not be a major ordeal, but the appraiser said we're going to put it in the incurable section because the price point of this home is $116,750. How many people would spend about $10,000 fixing structure? It's not economically feasible, or it's just not economic. What's the word?
It's not a good business case.
Yes, not a good business case. Not justifiable to put 10 in on a $116,000 home. So that's why the appraiser says, we're not saying it can't be fixed, but the cost to do it is out of line with the cost of the property. And so after all of those numbers are in there, they total up the depreciation, that's called accrued, and then they subtract the depreciation from cost new, and you've got the 81,750, and then you add the land and the site improvement last, and it leaves you with 116,750. So those steps are sort of straightforward. Do you think they are? When we do some of the math, I think it'll make some sense. Let me show you something. Go with me back to page 485. This sales comparison approach, it's on the same property, Potter. Didn't we say an appraiser's gonna do a couple of different approaches? Now, if you look at the very bottom lines, you see the price ranges of 116.5 and it goes up to 119, but then you see a third one that says 116.5. The appraiser looked at that work and said, we think the property's worth 116.5 under the sales approach. And then the appraiser did the cost approach. The cost approach came in a little bit higher, but it's a nice check and balance. We're looking at it this way and we're looking at it this way. The cost approach is always going to come in higher than the sales approach because the appraiser's starting out brand new. It's not substantially higher, but it's higher. And so, in other words, when the appraiser does all three approaches, they're not going to be way out of whack. It should show a little bit of a theme. Cost approach will be higher, sales approach will be just right, income approach will be lower on a residential property, probably. And then the appraiser will say, since I'm looking at residential, the sales approach is the best predictor of this residential property. That's what they mean by reconciling. Any comments or questions? What we're going to do Wednesday night is finish up the discussion on the cost approach because I want to talk to you about some depreciation. We're going to talk about another way to depreciate, and then we're going to look at the income approach. We'll do some math because we need to do some of this math, and then we'll bring in Unit 13 a little bit. So 13's only like 8 pages or 9 pages to read, maybe not even that many. So make sure you glance at it. A lot of what's in 13 we already know. It's about investment. We already know a bunch of the information there. And then we'll do the rest of this.